Alright, so now that the cross member is in there, the hard part is done. Now the rest of it is just a matter of bolting things on. It's pretty straightforward, but there are a few things that you have to kind of know a little bit about, a little bit of something something. So these have two different sides on them. You'll see this has knurled bits on this part right here, and then the top side is just smooth. You want to make sure the knurled side obviously goes down, because that's what sandwiches onto your tower and gives it some grip so you're not messing with your camber too much. And we'll just get these hand tightened for now. We'll line them up and cinch them down later on once we get everything attached. So since I painted these upper control arms, the threads for the ball joints kind of got some paint in it, and so you'll need to clean those out if you paint them. They are fine threads, and if they seem to be a little too tight, then you can add a little bit of anti-seize to the threads. And there you go, just so long as it's all the way seated in there. So normally before you would install the lower A-arm onto the spindle, you would want to put your spring up in there. The one bummer about the Speedway kit is you're supposed to cut this to the height you want for your ride height, but I won't know my ride height until I get the motor in here and I actually get the weight on my car. So right now if I were to try to put this in there, it would sit something right about like that, and you can see it's like probably 2 coils that need to be cut off. So I'm gonna have to wait to install the spring until much later. Now the instructions also say that if your car is gonna be sitting for a long time, to not use the shocks, because that could make the shocks go bad, apparently, just to have your car sitting for a long time. So they recommend to make up a rod that'll go in the place of your shock. This says to use 1/2-inch rod by 13.5 inches long, and you're supposed to get a tube that's a 7/16 inner diameter by 3 3/8 tube and weld it to the threaded rod. And that'll hold your A-arms in place if your car is going to be sitting for a while. Okay, so now that you got both sides kind of to this point, now is a good time to attach the power rack and the tie rod in so these spindles don't flop around. So for the power rack kit, it comes with these 3/4 inch spacers and longer bolts, but I'm not loving this right here. That boot is right up against that nut, and I don't know if that's gonna rub on there. You know, I've got more than enough space here. I'm kind of thinking I need another spacer in here. So now with the tie rods and the power rack attached, now the spindle's not gonna be flopping all over the place. Now we can start to attach the caliper bracket, and then the spindles, and then the caliper itself. These are your caliper brackets, and they are marked left and right. Left side is driver's side, right is passenger side. And they use these grade 8 bolts, and there are 2 different sizes on this Speedway kit. The bigger one is for the top, and the smaller one is for the bottom down here. And even though these have a lock washer, I'm still going to use Loctite on them, just because. According to the instructions, this upper 1/2-inch bolt needs to be torqued somewhere between 38 and 57 foot-pounds. So I think I'm going to do 45 foot-pounds. That seems like a good happy medium. The lower bolt, it says to torque it to 25 to 37 foot-pounds. So I'll probably do 30 or 35 foot-pounds, somewhere in there. Okay, so now it's time to turn our attention to the rotor. And this is a super messy job because we got to pack those bearings full of grease. And they do make a tool for packing bearings that's actually pretty handy. I just don't have one, so I'm going to do the old grease in the palm trick. You want to make sure you use gloves for this and have lots of shop towels handy. So first step is to clean your rotor. You want to make sure you got some good brake cleaner on hand and lots of it. Make sure you clean the whole surface of the brake, as well as the races and the inside where the spindle is going to go. So once you feel like you got it good and clean, now it's time to pack our bearings. You have two different bearings. You have an inner and an outer. The larger bearing is the inner bearing and the smaller one goes on the outside. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put some grease on the inside of the rotor. It's not necessary, but I just kind of like to pack this whole thing full of grease because grease is cheap. So I'll get some grease on the races. Now what I'll do, so I'll just get a glop of it like this, kind of fish it into my palm like so, and then you take your bearing and you just kind of want to cram as much grease as possible into your bearings. You can see this gap right here. I'm going to cram grease down in there by just kind of working it in like this. And just work my way around and just continue to cram it in there as you go around. Do the same thing on the other side of the bearing. Just kind of keep cramming it in there. And then what I like to do is I like to kind of try to turn it a little bit so it kind of gets those bearings moving and gets the grease kind of worked in there a little bit more. But that looks pretty good. Just drop it in there like so. The next step is to install the grease seal that keeps the grease inside your spindle. What I like to do is take my gloves that I wiped the grease off of, there's still a little bit of film on here, and just kind of get this a little bit of lube just to kind of give it some ability to slide into that thing. And then you want to be really careful not to bend the seal and just kind of hold it, hammer a little bit, work your way around, go to the high side, keep working your way around while you hold it, and inevitably it pops back out. All right, and 10 minutes later it's installed. Good job. So now we'll put the rotor up on the spindle, and I also like to put some grease on the spindle just because. Right here is where the front bearing rides, so I'll just put a little bit of grease right there. Right here is where that inner bearing rides, so I'm going to put some grease on that too. And then on the rubber part of the grease seal, I'm just going to rub a little bit of grease along that too, just to keep that seal from any chance of tearing at all. It shouldn't, but again, grease is cheap. Now we'll put in, again, skinny side towards the inside. There it goes. Then your washer, which has a tooth, goes in the groove right there. And your castle nut. Okay, so now we got to set the preload on this. Each manufacturer has their torque settings for this, and you can look that up if you want, but here's how I do it. Basically, I get this on there hand tight, and then you can kind of feel a little bit of resistance. Now I'm going to tighten it to 250 inch-pounds. It didn't do a whole lot, but that's perfect because now you can feel a little bit of resistance. So I'll back it off about another half a turn from there. Spinning the hub to seat the bearings, and then I'll re-torque it again. But this time I'm only doing 100 inch-pounds. Then you'll just tighten it so that you can get your cotter pin in there. Just got to go just a hair more so my cotter pin can get in there. All right, so then it's time to put the caliper on. So you have two different brake pads. You have this one here that's got these little ears on it and this flange deal. This one is the outer brake pad, so that's going to go out here. And then you have your inner brake pad, which you can see it's got this squealer thing on it. And it's got these ears here. So I decided I'm going to go ahead and install these springs kind of temporarily. So I'm just going to cut a half a coil off just so I can squeeze them in there. I don't want to cut too much off because you can't cut a spring longer. I went down to my local AutoZone and rented one of their spring compressor tools to squeeze these springs down enough to get them in there. I had to remove the bolts for the spindle, and once I squeezed the spring down enough and wrestled it in there, it was just enough to get a couple of threads on the bolts for the ball joints. And then I can get the shock bar thing I made in there, and with my impact kind of squish the spring even more. And that way I can tighten down the ball joints again. Trying to wrestle this thing in there, I scratched the crap out of that, but that's why you buy extra paint. So I didn't torque anything down yet or grease the ball joints or the tie rod ends yet, because all of those final adjustments will happen once I get everything ready to go. I have to do the motor in here still. I'm going to use the original steering column and try to make it work with this rack and pinion here. And I'm sure I'm going to have to cut another maybe half coil, maybe another full coil off of these springs. But for right now, the car is a roller. It's not on jack stands or anything. So I got a long ways to go. I have an idea for a motor that I'm going to put in here. You'll have to stay tuned. Something I've never done before, but I'm pretty excited about. Anyway, that's going to do it for now. So thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, comment, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.